Hey everyone, it's Wednesday here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Today, we're going to talk about the Steelers' lack of passing in the middle part of the field because another Steelers insider brought up recently about how, Mike Tomlin made it clear they're doing that to protect against turnovers. And a lot of people think that's the thing that held the Steelers offense back. Numbers show a different story when you look at other teams that did it like the Steelers did, just did it better. I want to talk about that and how the Steelers offense can move forward and make improvements next season. All that and taking your questions on the Locked On Steelers hotline. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show in your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. Thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. All right, Steelers fans, let's get into it. Let's talk about this Steelers offense. Now, I want to start with this and pointing to this because this has been a sore spot for a lot of people for a while and how the Steelers don't attack the middle part of the field, and they really haven't as much since the retirement of Ben Roethlisberger. It's been something they've avoided a lot, and statistically, there are things to back that up. And the reason this kind of kicked up a storm and why I wanted to focus on it was because of something another Steelers insider said, and then how it was extrapolated and turned into this much bigger thing than it actually is. Now, Mark Kaboly brought this up on 93.7 The Fan. You know Mark Kaboly. He's with the Pat McAfee show. We've had him on this show multiple times, but he brought this up on Tuesday and said this. Mike Tomlin's been very transparent with not targeting the middle part of the field. He says when you throw the ball across the middle part of the field, a lot of bad things can happen. So when he tells you that's just telling you their mindset. He says he said Mike Tomlin wants to stay away from turnovers, and because he believes the majority of turnovers do come from the middle part of the field throwing the ball. Now, that was a statement from Mark Kaboly, and I'll say factually, the Steelers did in 2024 specifically did throw the second fewest amount of time passes over the middle part of the field. That is a verifiable fact. But where this starts to jump off the rails and become a whole different conversation, that doesn't necessarily lead to, I think, learning the right things in this conversation, is where people try to say, oh, well, that's the biggest part of the offense. That's a problem because you have to throw over the middle part of the field to have success in the NFL. That's the biggest thing. The best teams in the NFL succeed in throwing the ball over the middle all the time. And that's absolutely what works all the time. That's not the case, though, because I think the Steelers do it situationally to try to do it and win it in certain spots. And what I'm going to show you in a bit are numbers that show you the Steelers were efficient when they went to the middle part of the field. They just picked their spots in doing so. But part of why they picked their spots were certain matchups that worked in their favor. Now, of course, a lot of the teams that were the most successful at throwing to the middle parts of the field at high rates were teams that had elite quarterbacks, teams that had Patrick Mahomes, like the Kansas City Chiefs, teams that had Josh Allen, teams that had, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, those types of players, or teams even with Jared Goff and the way that the Lions offensive line gave him time and they had playmakers on that team to do so. But if you're looking at those types of teams, the Steelers aren't like those teams. They don't have the upper tier quarterback play. They had Justin Fields and Russell Wilson, and they wanted to play to their strengths of their defense. And they also wanted to avoid strengths of opposing defenses because their offense isn't what they knew wasn't going to be some elite passing offense this year. So the reason I remember Mike Tomlin specifically bringing this up, because I asked him about this question back when it was mid-September and the Steelers weren't throwing to the middle part of the field. In fact, in the third game against the Chargers, they threw to the middle part of the field more than they did in the first two games combined. And Mike Tomlin basically pointed out, hey, that was because of the personnel we were facing. Here was Mike Tomlin, just to bring that back up if you want to remind yourself what he said when that specific moment happened, because I think this is what Mark Kaboly was referencing.
Mike, you guys targeted the middle part of the field twice as much as you had the previous two games combined. Was that more about the matchups and the things you guys saw in their defense, or more about Justin's growth in the offense?
Guys, as I've mentioned repeatedly in this process, man, in the early portions of the year when you got a small sample size, you can always have questions and perspectives like that, but really we're just trying to do what's required to win games. And so sometimes there can be an appearance of personality that's inappropriate. Week one, we were playing in Atlanta. We were playing Jesse Bates and Simmons, two top-notch safeties, man. We didn't want to throw the ball to them. And so when we threw the ball, we threw it outside down the grass. For example, this past week, the Chargers play a bunch of split safety coverage, and so it's middle of the field open, so you have opportunities to attack the ball down the middle of the field. My answer to that is keep watching. We're just trying to do what it needs to be done to position ourselves for victory every week. It better require a skill set, a well-rounded skill set from everyone involved, and it better require some open-minded coaching. And so that's just our general approach. Our personality will be revealed the more we play. But as we stand right now, we're just not overly concerned with establishing personality. Sometimes you can be so fixated on that you're not doing what's required to win games. And from a coaching perspective, that's stupid.
Now, again, where Mike Tomlin's coming from in there is saying, like, hey, yeah, not going after Jesse Bates and Justin Simmons down the middle part of the field with our number 2 quarterback playing in his first start with this offense and with the new offensive coordinator on the road against that team. And that made sense at the time. But it did turn out that the Steelers did target the middle part of the field the second fewest amount of times of any team in the NFL, meaning only one team targeted the field even less, than the Steelers did. And as I made my point earlier, the Steelers were still actually one of the more efficient teams in doing so when you looked at a lot of the metrics when it comes to targeting the middle part of the field. But my point in this is that I don't think that when people try to turn that part, like, oh, see, they're not throwing the middle part of the field because they're scared. They don't want to attack that. Yeah, they're not playing into the strengths of other teams, and they're not playing into the weakness of their own, and that they know they don't have one of the best quarterback situations in the NFL right now. They still need to develop that situation. They also don't have one of the best pass catching units in the NFL. We talked about how wide receiver was a not so great unit, for most of the season, and how George Pickens was still growing in his maturity, and Calvin Austin was growing in how he was making plays in the offense and things like that. So clearly, that wasn't the strength the Steelers wanted to lean on there. And for most of the season, that was fine with the offense. They were able to run the ball. They were able to have that balanced attack, and it worked. And at the end of the season, the running game tailed off, and that's why the Steelers offense went from being a top 10 offense in scoring to middle of the pack. I think they finished like 16th in the NFL in scoring at the end of the season. Not because they didn't throw to the middle part of the field, because when they weren't doing that early, they were still finding success. And a key example of, you're probably wondering, okay, well, who was the team that threw to the middle part of the field less, Chris? Because they're probably also another team that struggled on offense, except they weren't, because the team that threw to the middle part of the field even less than the Pittsburgh Steelers were the Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles. And they were a team that, again, did it less often, but like the Steelers, did it efficiently. And I went over several metrics going up in sports information systems in looking at these things. When it came to completion percentage, the Eagles had the highest completion percentage of any team targeting the middle part of the field. The Steelers ranked 3rd in there. Right in between them was the Lions. You look at passer rating. The Steelers had the 3rd best passer rating when targeting the middle part of the field. The Eagles, 7th best. When you looked at yards per attempt, Eagles 3rd best yards per attempt. Again, in efficiency and as far as rates, the Eagles ranked 3rd. The Steelers ranked 7th, top 10 in the NFL there. And then on target percentage, as far as the quality of throws that were being thrown, the Steelers had the highest on target percentage when throwing passes in the middle part of the field. Eagles ranked 7th there. Now, again, these don't mean that they did everything right there, but it does show that when they were picking their spots, when the Steelers attacked the middle part of the field, they did it well. They just didn't do it a lot because they needed to play to their strengths, and they didn't have as many strengths to play into that. Now, again, throwing to the middle part of the field, it can be a really good thing for the offense, but it can also absolutely backfire. And it often depends on the quality of quarterback play that you have. For example, the Eagles were a team that their strength is running the football, dominating the line of scrimmage. Jalen Hurts, good quarterback. We saw him play awesome in the Super Bowl, but we've also seen plenty of games where he wasn't so awesome and he made mistakes, and they wanted to limit where he made his mistakes in, which is why Jalen Hurts threw to the middle part of the field the least in the NFL among starting quarterbacks that played the whole season, and that's why the Eagles were in that category. But it didn't come back to bite them as much as the Steelers, because they have a really good offensive line. They have Saquon Barkley, and their run game didn't tail off at the end of the season the way the Steelers did, and that was the biggest problem. If you want to come at Mike Tomlin and Arthur Smith and Pat Meyer, come at them about the lack of development of the offensive line. That is where I think the biggest problem is here. But throwing to the middle part of the field isn't a cure-all for every offense. And that is the thing I think gets pulled out of this conversation too often and turned into this much bigger problem than it really is. For example, you want to know what the two teams that targeted the middle part of the field the most in the NFL season? It was the Cleveland Browns and the Dallas Cowboys. They were terrible. They weren't good at it, and it led to a lot of problems. Now, there are teams that threw it at a high rate and did very well with it, and they're teams with elite quarterback play. The next two teams, third and fourth in the NFL in targeting the middle part of the field as far as their attempts, the Chiefs and the Bengals, Patrick Mahomes and Joe Burrow. But in the top 10, there's not a group of teams that are just all the elite offenses. The top 10 did include the Lions, but it also included the Dolphins. It also included the Raiders. It also included the Jets. Teams that were meh at best, at worst. And that's where I think the Steelers are they didn't necessarily need to have to just try to throw the ball over the middle part of the field just to say you're doing so because someone looked at a pass chart and said, this is a big problem. No, they were playing to the strengths of the offense and the whole team because, again, the defense was supposed to be the strength of the team by not putting themselves in positions that are more likely to create turnovers. They were saying, hey, we're going to team that's going to be running the ball. When we create shot opportunities, they're often going to be down the sideline. We're going to try to get one-on-one opportunities for our playmakers to make those plays, and that's going to be how that works. When the Steelers had the prime quarterback and prime franchise quarterback in Ben Roethlisberger, they threw to the middle part of the field plenty. That was something that they absolutely did because they didn't have to worry about that because they trusted their quarterback. Now they know that they have to say, hey, we don't have one of those guys like the Eagles did. You got to play to your strengths that the Steelers tried to do. Again, the biggest difference, the Eagles' strengths are well developed. Their offensive line is much further along in their development because they've been doing this. They've been building this team for longer, and that's why the Steelers went and got Andy Wido, who helped build that roster to help them build their roster. And as I said, all season long, the Steelers are in the very early stages of trying to be like the Eagles in respect to their trench play and how they build the offense. That's what I think the conversation should be about, is that the Steelers are still trying to develop those guys. And again, if you want to come at Mike Tomlin, you want to come at other guys about it, absolutely talk about player development because the offensive line didn't take as many good steps as you wanted. I think Zach Frazier showed progress, Mason McCormick showed progress, Broderick Jones, not so much. And you wanted to see more there. And the unit did not, become a more cohesive unit as the season continued. Those are the things that you come out here. But the idea that just throwing to the ball in the middle part of the field and that the Steelers are saying, don't do it. That's not what's happening. What's happening is they're drawing fewer concepts to that area because they know that that's not their strength. It's when they don't have top tier quarterback play. So they're creating safer passing lanes for the most part, but saying, hey, if the middle part of the field's open, go there. And again, when they did, they were one of the more efficient teams in the NFL in doing so by several metrics. So I say all that to say, the Steelers offense, there's plenty of issues to go around about. I think a lot of them are personnel-wise. But the throwing to the middle part of the field thing, it's not as big as of a thing right now. Now, could it be different next season? Sure. There's different seasons all the time. But I base this off of how we watch the team when you look at the numbers, where they compare, and why there's no real determination of the teams that threw to the middle part of the field more than others, that they're all really good, and the teams that threw to the middle part of the field less were all really bad. Because, again, Eagles won the Super Bowl, were a pretty good offense. Also, the team right behind the Steelers in throwing to the middle part of the field, Matt LaFleur's Packers with Jordan Love. Another offense that I'd say that you look at that and it's better than the Steelers offense, but is a team that I think can show that, like, hey, you don't necessarily need to do that to be a really good offense. It'd be nice, but you don't need to play to your weaknesses to get there. All right, point being made there. I think that we can move on. We have several questions for you guys to get on. I think everyone that calls into the Locked On Steelers hotline, we'll get to that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We're right back. But first, I want to remind you, this show is also brought to you by TurboTax. This is a message from sponsor Intuit TurboTax. Taxes were waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back. And then, while waiting, wondering, and worrying some more, now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives you your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. Taxes are an expert who will find you your every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now, this is Taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue this episode here. I want to get to the Locked On Steelers mailbag. I do thank all the people who do call in because we have a lot of calls that are stacking up. And I apologize we don't get to all of them right away, but we try to talk about a lot of different things on this show. But as always, you can call in at 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from, keep your question under a minute, and we will get to your question on the show. And we start with this question that delves back into the offense a bit, and it delves with Justin Fields. And I think it's kind of relevant considering that one of the teams we were talking about that weren't the Pittsburgh Steelers in this last segment. But here's Micah from Battle Creek, Michigan, asking about Justin Fields.
Hi, Chris. Micah here again from Battle Creek, Michigan. This is my second time calling. Not to ask the same question in a different way, but I did want to provide some clarification from the last question about Justin Fields. I guess what I'm wondering, in your opinion, a lot of what I've heard is a lot of the strengths and weaknesses that Russ has compared to Justin has is pretty similar. And from what I can see, he just has way more potential, which you've said so many times in your show. But I'm just curious your opinion. When you look at the two quarterbacks, or even the other options that the Steelers might have, how do you feel about Justin Fields? Do you see potential in him as a quarterback? Do you think he is the future and a strong choice for the Steelers? I just want your opinion on that. I appreciate your willingness to potentially take my question. Have a good day. Bye.
Thank you, Micah, and thank everyone who calls into the Locked On Steelers hotline at 412-223-6644. But okay, let's get into this a little bit here. So Justin Fields, Russell Wilson. I would not say that their skills are the same or similar. Russell Wilson not nearly as mobile as Justin Fields, but Russell Wilson has demonstrated a better ability to see the field and take advantage of different receivers in the offense. Case in point, when he came into the offense, passing numbers, took a big jump for the Steelers. They were more efficient in throwing the football in different parts. They opened up for bigger plays. You saw what they did to the Bengals. There was definitely an uptick there. But where Justin Fields, I think, has Russell Wilson, and why I continue to say I think Justin Fields is the person the Steelers should and are going to sign in this offseason to be their quarterback number one for 2025. The big reason is because I think that when you look at where Russell Wilson trailed off at the end of the season, he couldn't deal with the pressure of a young offensive line as well as a Justin Fields. He was that kind of got in the way of things, and when the run game disappeared, so did he in his efficient play, because that was one of the things he was doing really well, was playing off the run. Whereas Justin Fields is a guy who can create with his legs. He still has a cannon arm. He still has an ability. He can throw accurately. And I think accuracy isn't the problem. His biggest thing is he just has to get more comfortable with an offense and seeing the field and interpret and figuring out where he needs to go with the football. But again, the potential of Justin Fields is the question here. Now, can Justin Fields become a franchise quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers? That's a big question, and I think we need to see more to see if that's even possible. It didn't work out for him in Chicago, and I think he'd have to prove a lot to even get into that conversation. So I'm not going to say that he's just going to be that guy, but I will say I do think he can do something for the Steelers like Jalen Hurts has done for the Philadelphia Eagles. Because when you look at how the Eagles use him, they don't ask him to be the most daring quarterback that throws the most dangerous passes. They ask him to take shots in the right spots, make good decisions, play within the offense, lean on the strengths of the team, which were the offensive line, running the football, and playing aggressive defense, and make the plays when they're given. And the Kansas City Chiefs in that Super Bowl, they dedicated everything they had to stopping Saquon Barkley in that run game. And that opened up plenty of one-on-one opportunities for Jalen Hurts to take advantage of it, and he did. And that's where I think the Steelers are trying to get to with Justin Fields or with whoever they go at quarterback, because I think that's a big part of what the Steelers are doing right now is they're preparing their roster for when they do get that young quarterback in the future, in the 2026 NFL draft, when they trade up and they get the quarterback that they think is the guy. They want it to be like Roethlisberger's early years. They want it to be him being plopped in the middle of a really good run game with a really good defense, not having to ask him to do too much. But when you ask him to do enough, he's a playmaker and he makes plays. And Justin Fields gives you an opportunity to be an athletic quarterback who has a good arm, who has NFL experience, who also knows your offense a bit better now, that he can be a guy who could at least hold it down while you go get that other person in the future. But again, if Justin Fields was able to be like Jalen Hurts, at different parts of the season, I think that would be huge for the Steelers. It would give them a presence in the quarterback room that they haven't had for a while in a sense of consistency. And I think it's going to come down to still, like, I don't think Justin Fields is just going to turn into, like, Lamar Jackson overnight. But I do think that what he can do is he can show that he can be more efficient in the Steelers offense, and he can be a better commander on the field than he was in his first 6 games. Because even he admitted, he said, I needed to play better. He said that, in his first week when Russell Wilson returned and, took over the offense. But I don't think it's that he's incapable. I think he just has to get better at it. And, that's when you're talking about potential. What potential can be reached for Justin Fields? I think his potential is a Jalen Hurts type of player. And again, Jalen Hurts isn't the straw that makes that stirs the drink for the Philadelphia Eagles. It's their run game. It's everything that's around him. But you still need a good quarterback who can make good decisions on the field and have the athleticism to use his body the right way to run the ball, but also use his arm to convert when his what he's seeing with his eyes. And that's, I think, where Justin Fields needs to improve the most is his seeing with his eyes and processing what's going on there. And there were times he made some great reads and some great throws. I'm not saying that he didn't, but I am saying that there were times where I think that you could see the lack of development there, and that's something that he's still working on moving forward. So thank you, Michael, for your question. If you're talking about Justin Fields and potential, I think there's potential there. I don't know if he'll get to the potential I think he has, because I've seen him since college. I think that he has some really good traits that could turn into some things. But it's going to depend on him, and if he can kind of grow from what he's been already. And I think he showed good signs last year with Pittsburgh when he played the first 6 games. But now he has to do more than that. If the Steelers assign him and he becomes the guy, he's going to have to prove that he can do this every single week and be that consistent leader, not turn over the ball, but give your team a chance to win. So I think that that's the potential of a Justin Fields, is to be more like a Jalen Hurts for the Steelers moving forward. It doesn't guarantee that he's going to be that guy for the Steelers, but I think that's what you're looking for if you're the Steelers, and hoping that he can turn into that as the ceiling of the situation. But of course, we got to see what the Steelers actually do. They have not signed anyone as of the time of me making this recording. But I want to take another break. When we come back, I want to get another question in about analytics and how they play into things, because when we're just talking about the middle part of the field, that's a part of analytics and where things play into and how the Steelers can use it better. We'll talk about that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I remind you, this show is also brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just beginning on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because FanDuel is your home for NBA live betting. So even if you miss your first minutes of the game, or you want to bet on the fourth quarter comeback, you can make your picks from the first whistle until the final buzzer. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. However you play, that now is the perfect time to join. New FanDuel customers can get started with $150 in bonus bets if you hit on your first bet of $5 or more. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We've talked a lot about how the Steelers, use their offense. We talked about the quarterbacks. I want to talk about something else here that was an interesting question brought up by Tim out in Charlotte, North Carolina, when it regards to how the Steelers apply information and when it comes to analytics. Here was Tim from Charlotte.
Hey, Chris. Tim from Charlotte, North Carolina. Love the show. Big Steelers fan. So this question is something a little bit off the track of what Steelers fans usually think of. I'm a little bit biased because I'm an analyst myself. I recall clearly hearing Mike Tomlin say stats are for losers and our comfort food this year. That was kind of funny. But I wondered if that mentality is actually something that's holding this team's progress back on both sides of the ball. The Steelers are one of the least or lowest ranked teams that are analytics driven in the league. And it seems like they're a little bit resistant to that. So is that due to the franchise mentality versus the build of the team maybe overriding the moment? On those weighty downs, maybe they feel like they don't have the talent. But we did see a good amount of situations this year that maybe if there was some analytics involved, it might have went a different direction or made a little bit better decisions at the end of halves or et cetera. So really curious about that one, sort of an unspoken topic. But I want to get your thoughts. Really appreciate everything you do on the show, man. Keep rocking. Love the show. Listen to it every day on the morning on the way to work.
Well, thank you, Tim, for loving the show, and thank you for calling into the show. If you want to be like Tim and Micah, you can call in to get your show on the air. You can call 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from. Keep your question under a minute. We'll try to get you on the show. Tim, I think it's a good question about analytics. Now, I want to put a few things out here. The Steelers do use analytics. Like, they do have people that are responsible for that, like in the press box. I've seen them that evaluate games. They have entire teams that break things down and help them set things up. But how they use them, I think, is a good question, and that's where I think the Steelers could, be the rubber that meets the road for this conversation and try to actually use analytics in better ways, because the Steelers do, again, they do have analytical teams on on their payroll, but you look at when Mike Tomlin makes the call on when to go for on fourth down, or what there's certain parts of analytics that suggest, oh, this is more successful than that, and this is more successful than this, and I think that's where the Steelers maybe could use some help sometimes. I think the biggest thing about analytics, and to what what Tim was saying here, we talk about Mike Tomlin's stats are for losers thing. He kind of brought that up on me one time when I pointed out, like, hey, right now, and this was the earlier portion of the 2023 season, and I kind of brought up to him, like, hey, you have the 8th most allowed receiving yards to wide receivers right now. Is that a problem? And particularly, I was asking that because Joey Porter Jr. was just drafted and he hadn't been playing a whole lot. And Mike Tomlin dismissed the question. He was like, no, he's like, that's a very specific stat, and that's not necessarily accurate as far as what's been going on in some of these games. And so I think that part of where the resistance is for the Steelers and for Mike Tomlin is that there is an over application of analytics sometimes, where, like, talking about the middle part of the field, where it's just, I think, made to be a much bigger thing than it actually is sometimes. And I think that's where analytics can kind of get taken away. Now, here's the thing. Analytics are very important, and the Steelers do have analytics, and they include that in their research. But I think the Steelers have to get better in how they include it, and that's a challenge for Mike Tomlin, for this staff, and for everyone involved, because if you get good at analyzing things and breaking down what's going on there, in game, and having people in your booth that can help you see things, or help you, go get through processes a bit faster, a bit smoother, or just be thinking on other topics. Those types of things, that's where advanced analytics can play out, is people helping you make decisions faster, people helping you figure things out, and having systems in place to get you there. So it's a good question, because the Steelers definitely are somewhat resistant to it. I think part of that is the lack of hiring opportunities sometimes, is because the Steelers, we've been very open about how the Steelers haven't when it comes to analytics, they're not going to keep booking up the training staff, not the training staff, the coaching staff. They're not trying to expand that by too much. I look at that, and I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to find other people that can get these things across earlier in the season. And I think when it comes to analytics and how it's used, it's just dependent on how it's used. You can't. I think there's good examples and there's bad examples, and using it to try to determine when you're gonna try a certain play, maybe that can work if there's certain parameters that can help you figure out. But I think part of what the Steelers don't want to do is they don't become overly dependent on that, because so much of the game of football is the human element. It's the idea of you're feeling out a situation, you're going to try to make the right judgment call there, and that's where I think the Steelers are somewhat resistant to it. But I do think they would serve themselves by being better at that, by opening up themselves up to more opportunities to be better at that, and to maybe investing more into getting more analytical resources to helping their stuff. Because again, like analyzing and analytics, that's part of what Dan Rooney did when he kind of took over the team from the original Art Rooney way back in the 70s, and they used their own version of analytics, and it helped them build what they needed to build. And so I think that's where if you're looking at analytics, you need to see the Steelers taking a step forward in how they apply it to their coaching staff. And maybe that's where the disconnect is happening, is that maybe some trainings are going down, and they're having these groups here, but trying to incorporate that into the game plan, that could be a part of the challenge that the Steelers are going through right now. But again, there's a lot of things out there, and I'm not going to pretend like I know everything about the Steelers analytical group and what they analyze and how it's played out and who they all the different intricacies there. But when it comes to analytics, the Steelers do have a team for it. I just think that, like other things, the Steelers aren't trying to pay as much for those type of, for adding extra coaches and things like that to their coaching staff and rise up the bill there. So thank you for the question, Tim. I appreciate you, because it is not a normal question to ask about analytics and the lack of usage there. I do think the Steelers, again, could use that on their side, but I also think that they are I get why they don't want to, because they want to be a team that can just kind of command their own situation and not have to rely on others to figure those things out. So all that being said, I think it's to answer your question about analytics, I think that they could do better about the application of it. They do have analytics people involved, but how they apply it, that's something that we won't know. I was hoping that there would be on Hard Knocks an opportunity like we saw with the Ravens and how they said Russell Wilson's layups and 3-pointers. There weren't as many of those moments with the Steelers, and yet you do see the Steelers making adjustments in games, before games, that take away team strength and allow them to win several of the games that they do win. I think that that's a big factor there. But it's a good question. I think the bottom line is people don't all the way know what the Steelers do on analytics and everything that goes into that, because it's more than just simply talking about it. But I do think that there are things the Steelers could improve in that department. And it's probably the implementation of those analytics in the in the right way, so that the Steelers can find, turn that information into better results in certain situations. So great question, Tom. Tim, excuse me. Great question, Mike. Appreciate both of you calling, and appreciate all of you tuning in to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. Find me here in the Locked On Steelers podcast every day, Monday through Friday. Breaking down your Steelers. We're back here tomorrow with more on the Locked On Steelers podcast.